At my grandfather's funeral, I stood in my major's uniform. My step-aunt, Silvana, looked at the medals on my chest and sneered. "Take off that costume," she spat. "You're just the help." To her, my 11 years of service was a joke. I was the family's dirty little secret. What she didn't realize is that this secret was about to become her public execution. My name is Major Praise Karina. I am 29 years old. And on this cold November morning, the steady Virginia rain washing over the cobblestone streets of Old Town Alexandria felt like a weak apology for the atmosphere inside the Karina mansion. The chill outside was honest, the one inside was a carefully constructed frost. I stood in the grand foyer, a silent, solitary figure in my Army service uniform. The deep blue of the jacket felt like a second skin, the perfectly pressed creases a testament to a discipline that had become the very bedrock of my existence. On my chest, the rows of ribbons and medals, each one a marker of a promise kept, a challenge met, a piece of my life given over 11 years of service, felt heavier than usual. They were symbols of honor in my world. Here, in the house my grandfather built, they were apparently symbols of defiance. In the eyes of my step-aunt, Silvana Crow, I was not an officer. I was not the grieving granddaughter returned home. I was an anomaly, a disruption to her perfectly curated world of quiet wealth and whispered power. She glided past me, a phantom in black silk, the cloying scent of Chanel No. 5 trailing behind her like a toxic cloud. She leaned toward my cousin, Serafina. Her voice a low, venomous hiss meant just for me to hear. "Look at her," Silvana whispered, a flick of her eyes my only acknowledgement. "Dressed as if she's here to recruit, not to mourn. It's a disgrace to the Karina name." Serafina, ever the loyal echo, let out a delicate giggle. It was a sound like shattered glass, sharp and cruel, and it found a place deep inside my chest to twist. I kept my gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, my posture rigid, my hands held loosely at my sides as regulations dictated. I was trained to remain calm in the face of enemy fire. I never imagined the most hostile territory I'd ever stand on would be the Persian rug in my own family's home. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory, a lesson from years ago. Discipline isn't just for the battlefield, Praise. It's holding your ground when the enemy is standing right in front of you. I held my ground. A brief respite came in the form of a United States Senator, an old friend of my grandfather's. His face was etched with genuine sadness as he approached me, his eyes immediately drawn to the silver oak leaf on my shoulder marks. He offered a firm, respectful handshake. "Major Karina," he said, his voice rumbling with sincerity, "my deepest condolences on your loss. The general was so immensely proud of you. He told me so himself." For a single, fleeting moment, a fragile warmth spread through my heart, a flicker of recognition, a sense of belonging. It was extinguished as quickly as it came. Like a hawk swooping on its prey, Silvana was there, linking her arm through the senator's, physically maneuvering him away from me. Her smile was blinding, her voice dripping with a honey I knew was laced with poison. "Oh, Senator, how wonderful to see you. Please, let me introduce you to the family," she purred, her tone implying a circle I was clearly outside of. She gestured vaguely in my direction, without looking at me. "Don't mind her, she's just some distant relation, here to help us with a few things." She emphasized the word help, letting it hang in the air, a deliberate, perfectly aimed missile. In that single sentence, she had stripped me of everything. My rank, my service, my very identity as the general's granddaughter. I was no longer Major Praise Karina. I was a nameless, faceless helper, an employee, a nobody. The air grew thick in my throat, but my training, my grandfather's words, held me fast. My spine remained a steel rod, my expression a neutral mask. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I let the insult wash over me, feeling it stain me, but I refused to let it bend me. An hour later, the battleground shifted to the library. The scent of old leather and wood polish, once a source of comfort, now felt like the air in an arena before a fight. This room had been my grandfather's sanctuary. Today it was their stage. Silvana, Serafina, and her husband, the ambitious DC lawyer Caspian Thorne, settled into the plush leather armchairs with an air of entitled victory. They were predators waiting for the feast. I chose to stand. Alistair Finch, the family's longtime attorney, cleared his throat. He was a man of quiet dignity, and his eyes met mine for a brief, unreadable moment before he began to read from the last will and testament of General Theron Karina. He went through the minor bequests, the usual legal jargon, while the tension in the room coiled tighter and tighter. And then he reached the final, most important section. His voice was clear and steady. To my sole granddaughter, Major Praise Karina, I bequeath the entirety of my estate. This includes the Karina Mansion and all its holdings, the full contents of the Karina Trust Fund, valued at $11 million, and my 41% of controlling shares in Ethelgard Industries. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. It was shattered by Silvana's shriek. "Absurd!" she screamed, lunging to her feet, her mask of civility disintegrating into raw, ugly rage. The old man was senile. He'd lost his mind. Chaos erupted. Caspian was on his feet, his face pale with shock, while Serafina simply stared, her mouth agape. Amid the turmoil, Mr. Finch walked calmly over to me and handed me a thick, sealed envelope bearing my grandfather's crest. As I turned to leave the war zone behind me, a young woman I recognized as the lawyer's assistant, Lyra Vance, intercepted me near the door. She moved with a quiet urgency, pressing a small metallic object into my hand. It was a USB drive. "The General's final directive," she whispered, her eyes wide with a meaning I didn't yet understand. Then she was gone. I closed my hand around the cool metal, the weight of it, and the weight of the envelope, feeling far heavier than any medal I had ever earned. The war, it seemed, had only just begun. I didn't go back to Fort Liberty. My duty there could wait. My duty to the truth could not. Instead, I drove my beat-up Ford sedan to an old Holiday Inn Express on the outskirts of Alexandria, the kind of anonymous, transient place where no one pays attention to a lone woman with a single military-issue duffel bag. The room smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale, cheap coffee from a machine in the lobby. It was perfect. This sterile, impersonal box would become my forward operating base. I sat on the edge of the stiff, polyester-covered bed, my laptop humming on the small desk. The envelope from Mr. Finch lay unopened beside it. First, the intel. I took a steadying breath and slid the USB drive Lyra Vance had given me into the port. The screen flickered to life, and with it, my world began to crack at the seams. At West Point, a philosophy professor once lectured us on Stoicism. "You do not control what happens to you," he had said, pacing before the class of cadets, "but you have absolute control over how you respond." For years, I had lived by that creed. I had controlled my response to enemy ambushes in Afghanistan and the subtle, constant hostility of my own family. Now I would respond to this. The skills I'd honed in intel analysis, sifting through data, identifying patterns, connecting seemingly disparate pieces of information, were now turned inward, aimed at the very people who were supposed to be my foundation. I navigated the drive's contents with a cold, methodical precision. It was organized into folders, each a chapter in a story of betrayal. Files, emails, audio recordings. They appeared on the screen like shards of a shattered mirror, each one reflecting a distorted, ugly piece of a truth I never knew existed. My grandfather's words came back to me, not with comfort, but with a chilling new meaning. Start with trust, then dig deeper. My trust was a crater. It was time to dig. I clicked on the first folder labeled Estate Planning. The email chains between Silvana and Caspian made a bitter, acidic bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just about them contesting the will. It was a calculated, long-term campaign to erase me. I scrolled through messages dating back years, a slow-burning conspiracy laid bare in cold, black-and-white text. They didn't just discuss legal strategies, they reveled in their contempt for me. In one email, Caspian had written, "Don't worry, Auntie. If the little soldier girl ever dares to show her face, I have 100 ways to make her renounce it all voluntarily. She's used to discipline. We'll just have to show her what the real world's discipline looks like." The phrase, "the little soldier girl," struck me like a physical blow. It was so dismissive, so belittling. It was how they saw me. Not as a decorated officer, not as family, but as a child playing dress-up, a nuisance to be managed. Silvana's reply was even more chilling. It would be better if she never appeared at all. Her very existence is an insult. My hands tightened on the edge of the desk. They had plotted my removal from the family legacy for years, viewing me as an insect to be crushed before I could even reach the house. Next, I opened an audio file. It was a recording of Lyra Vance, her voice trembling but clear. She was recounting the day Caspian fired her. She described how she had found evidence of him funneling money from Ethelgard Industries through a sham charity. And when she confronted him, he had threatened her career, her reputation, everything. The recording was a raw, painful testament to their ruthlessness. They weren't just greedy, they were cruel. They destroyed lives as casually as one might swat a fly. But the final devastating blow was waiting in a folder encrypted with a single ominous name: Dawnfall. My training kicked in, my fingers flying across the keyboard, breaking the simple password, my grandfather's date of birth, in seconds. The folder opened. It contained only one file, a single image. My breath hitched. The screen showed a photograph, grainy and faded with age. A little girl, no older than 4, with a shock of blonde hair, sat smiling on a wide green lawn. I recognized the barracks in the background. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 1996. The little girl was me. Sitting beside me, his arm draped protectively around my small shoulders, was a young paratrooper. He wore the 82nd Airborne patch on his sleeve, the same one I now wore on mine. His smile was warm, his eyes crinkling at the corners, with a joy that seemed to leap off the screen. It was a face I had never seen before. It was not my grandfather, Theron Karina. My eyes scanned to the bottom of the photo. A typed caption, a name, Major Jackson Jax Creed. And beneath the name, 2 words that shattered my entire reality: the truth. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. My lungs seized. All my life, I was told a simple, tragic story. My father, an Air Force pilot, had died in a routine training accident before I was old enough to remember him. A hero gone too soon. It was a clean, honorable narrative. It was also a complete and utter lie. This was a different man, a different uniform, a different story. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. This wasn't about a mansion or stocks or money. They had taken more than that. They had stolen my father from me. They had stolen my history. The foundation of who I was, the story of my life, crumbled into dust. I stared at the smiling man on the screen, a ghost I never knew I was supposed to be haunted by. The questions were a firestorm in my mind. Why? Who was this man? Why was he hidden from me? The pain was a sharp physical agony, a knife twisting in my soul. I wonder if you've ever had a moment like that. A moment where you realize a fundamental truth you've built your life on is a lie. It's a feeling of absolute freefall, isn't it? The grief and anger were a suffocating wave, but beneath them, a single cold point of clarity began to form. My mission had changed. One question burned brighter than all the rest, a singular focus in the wreckage of my past. Jackson Creed. Who are you? The next morning, I traded my Army service uniform for a different kind of armor, a simple, sharp navy blue pantsuit. The fabric was crisp, the lines severe. This was my new battlefield, and I would dress for it accordingly. The headquarters of Ethelgard Industries was a gleaming glass tower in Tysons, Virginia, a monument to the very power and influence I was now challenging. It was designed to intimidate. I refused to be. As I walked through the revolving doors into the soaring marble lobby, a burly security guard, clearly acting on instructions, moved to intercept me. His posture was deliberately dismissive. "Ma'am, the visitor waiting area is over there," he said, pointing a thick thumb toward a row of cheap plastic chairs near the entrance, where a few delivery couriers were scrolling on their phones. The humiliation was intentional, a petty power play to put me in my place before I even began. I felt a flash of heat, the familiar anger, but I pushed it down. My grandfather used to quote the book of Proverbs to me. "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Caspian's pride was about to have a very long fall. I met the guard's gaze, my voice as cold and flat as the marble floor. "I'm not a visitor." I paused for a beat. "I'm the owner." A smirk played on his lips. "Sure you are, ma'am, if you'll just have a seat." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood my ground in the center of the lobby, my presence a silent, immovable act of defiance. The quiet standoff turned the expansive, opulent space into a tense theater. Heads began to turn. The air crackled. The guard shifted uncomfortably. He had expected a scene, an argument he could easily win. He wasn't prepared for disciplined silence. Finally, the elevator doors chimed, and Lyra Vance emerged, a file folder clutched in her hand and a look of grim determination on her face. The guard's smirk vanished. He stepped aside. The boardroom on the top floor was Caspian Thorne's fortress. With its panoramic view of the Washington, D.C. skyline, it was a room built to project absolute power. He sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, oozing smug satisfaction, flanked by a handful of nervous-looking executives. His face contorted with rage the moment Lyra and I stepped through the doors. "What are you doing here?" he roared, his voice echoing in the vast room. "Security, get her out!" I ignored him completely, walking with measured steps to the head of the table. I placed the leather-bound legal portfolio, prepared by Mr. Finch, down with a soft but definitive thud. "According to the corporate bylaws of Ethelgard Industries," I announced, my voice clear and steady, projecting to every corner of the room, just as I had been trained to do on the parade ground. a shareholder in possession of over 40% of the company's stock, has the right to preside over any meeting at any time. I let the words sink in, locking my eyes with his. I saw the flicker of confusion, then dawning horror on his face. He was still thinking in terms of being outvoted on the board. He hadn't grasped the true scope of his defeat. This 41% doesn't just give me a seat at your table, Mr. Thorne. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a low, intense pitch. It gives me the right to command this meeting. A profound, suffocating silence enveloped the room. The executive stared, frozen. The smug confidence on Caspian's face shattered like cheap glass, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. The sweetness, however, was short-lived. Later that evening, as I walked back to my old Ford in the dim, concrete vastness of a public parking garage, a flash of white under my windshield wiper caught my eye. My heart sank. It wasn't a parking ticket. It was a copy of the personal letter my grandfather had written to me, the one that had been sealed in the envelope from Mr. Finch, the one I had just read for the first time an hour ago. But this copy was desecrated. The corners were blackened and scorched, the edges curled and brittle from a flame. The words written in my grandfather's familiar hand were nearly obliterated by the heat, but I could just make out the ghosts of the phrases, "your courage," and "I love you." There was no note, no message. None was needed. The message was clear. You've gone too far. We can burn your inheritance just as easily as we can burn you. An icy rage, sharp and clean, shot up my spine. This wasn't a corporate battle anymore. This wasn't a fight. This was a threat. They weren't just trying to win. They wanted to destroy. The rules of engagement had just changed. I would no longer just defend and attack. It was time to hunt. The scorched letter, it felt like a brand on my soul. That night, sleep offered no escape, only fractured nightmares of fire and betrayal. By the next afternoon, I found myself sitting in a red vinyl booth at a classic American diner in the Delray neighborhood of Alexandria. The air smelled of frying bacon and coffee. I was pushing the remains of a dry burger around my plate. The weight of my isolation pressing down on me so hard it was difficult to breathe. I had won a battle, but the threat of the larger war left me feeling utterly, profoundly alone. Then the bell above the door jingled. Lyra Vance walked in, her eyes scanning the room for a moment before landing on me. She slid into the booth opposite me without a word, a small, knowing smile on her face. "I figured I'd find you here," she said, her voice soft. "A place like this, it's real, not like their world." She motioned to the waitress, then pushed a heavy ceramic mug of steaming black coffee across the table toward me. "I quit my job at the law firm this morning. I can't work for people who represent that kind of evil." I looked up at her, surprised. She was throwing away her career, her stability, for a fight that wasn't even hers. She seemed to read my mind. The general trusted me, praise. He gave me a chance when no one else would. And now, she met my gaze, her own eyes clear and unwavering. "Now I trust you, Major." It was the first time in days someone had called me by my rank, without a trace of sarcasm or contempt. It was a simple word, but it landed like a lifeline. A small, tentative warmth spread through my chest, a flicker of light in the suffocating darkness. In that moment, sitting in a cheap diner booth, I realized I was no longer fighting this war alone. "Thank you, Lyra," I said, my voice hoarse. It was all I could manage. She nodded, taking a sip of her own coffee. She then told me about the day she was fired, filling in the gaps from the audio file. I took the evidence of Caspian's embezzlement directly to Silvana, she said, her voice still holding a tremor of remembered shock. She just smirked, as if it was all a tiresome game. But the thing that really broke me was Serafina. Lyra paused, her eyes looking past me, replaying the scene. She was there when Caspian was shouting at me, threatening to ruin me. She just stood there, looking at me like I was a bug on her shoe. Then she turned to Caspian, not with anger, but with a bored sigh, and said, "Darling, don't make a scene. Mother wouldn't like the noise." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Serafina hadn't cared about the truth. She hadn't cared that an innocent person's life was being dismantled. She only cared about maintaining the pristine, undisturbed surface of their perfect, gilded lives. Lyra's story confirmed a truth I had always felt, but never fully articulated. Silvana's cruelty was loud and overt, a raging fire, but Serafina's was a quiet, cold poison, perhaps even more terrifying in its absolute lack of empathy. That evening, back in the sterile quiet of my motel room, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Major Karina?" The voice on the other end was gravelly, aged, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of strength. I recognized it instantly. It was the old paratrooper from the funeral, the one who had pressed a slip of paper into my hand. "Yes, this is she. This is Sergeant Frank Kowalski, retired," he said. "We heard about the board meeting. You did good, Major, real good." He cleared his throat. The general, he had brothers, and those brothers don't ever abandon the child of a fallen comrade. We've been doing some digging of our own. We have some intel on the general's old friend, this Jackson Creed. My heart leaped into my throat. "Meet us at the Airborne and Special Operations Museum. We've got your 6. He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the silence of the room no longer feeling empty, but filled with a new, powerful presence. The paratrooper's creed, the oath I had taken, the words every jumper lives by, echoed in my mind. I will never fail my comrades. Family isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty. It's about who stands with you in the fire. My blood relatives had left me to burn. But in one day, I had found my true squadron. I had an army. I had a real family. The text message from Serafina arrived 2 days after my meeting with the old paratroopers. It was an invitation for tea, worded with a cloying sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Let's talk, just the two of us, like old times." Old times? The only old times I remembered were ones where I was invisible. Still, against all logic, a tiny, treacherous flicker of hope ignited within me. Lyra's story had painted Serafina as passively cruel, a follower, not a leader. Could she be the weak link? Could reason prevail with her, away from the toxic influence of her mother and husband? I agreed to meet. I had to know. She chose a painfully chic tea room in Georgetown, the kind of place with embroidered napkins and bone china, designed for quiet, civilized conversations. It was the perfect stage for a disingenuous performance. She arrived late, a classic power move, sweeping in, wearing a cream-colored silk dress that made her look like a fallen angel. She sat, ordered a pot of Earl Grey, and then turned her wide, supposedly innocent eyes on me. "Praise," she began, her voice a soft, rehearsed murmur. "Mother and Caspian are just terribly worried about you. They were shocked, that's all. It was a lot to take in, but we're family. We can work this out." The word family hung between us, a poisoned dart. A foolish, weak part of me, A part I thought I had buried long ago wanted to believe her. It was the part of me that still yearned for a normal life, for holiday dinners that didn't feel like a ceasefire. Family doesn't try to destroy each other, Serafina, I said, my voice lower than I intended. She let out a theatrical sigh, the picture of weary patience. You just don't understand this world, Praise. It has rules. Everything would be so much easier for you if you would just cooperate. She was offering an olive branch, but I could see the thorns hidden beneath the leaves. It was a threat wrapped in the language of concern. I remembered something I once heard from the author, Brené Brown, in a podcast. You can't negotiate your worth with people who don't have the ability to see it. Cooperate? I asked, keeping my voice even. What does cooperation look like? Serafina smiled then, a dazzling, confident expression she thought was charming. To me, it looked predatory. It's simple, really. All you have to do is sign the papers, renounce the inheritance. Mother says she'll arrange a generous monthly allowance for you. Enough for you to live quite comfortably anywhere you want. You'd be welcomed back for the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. You'd be part of the family again. I stared at her, the clinking of teaspoons and quiet chatter of the tea room fading into a dull roar in my ears. I couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer breathtaking arrogance. They thought my self-respect, my grandfather's legacy, my father's stolen honor, all of it, could be bought, purchased with a monthly check, like a subscription service to their approval. They wanted me to sell my soul for the privilege of eating dry turkey and enduring their condescending smiles once a year. The fragile hope I had walked in with shattered into a million pieces. The rage that settled in its place was cold and clear. My worth isn't for sale, Serafina, I said. The smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by the familiar cold contempt I had known my entire life. The mask was off. You always were this way, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Stubborn, stupid. Don't you get it? You don't belong here. You never did. She leaned across the table, her eyes burning with a resentment that seemed ancient. Grandfather only kept you around out of pity, a charity case. You're not his legacy, Praise. She paused, letting her final words land with the force of a killing blow. You were a burden he carried his entire life. There it was, the deepest, darkest fear I had carried in secret since I was a child, spoken aloud, the fear that I was unwanted, tolerated, a mistake. For a moment, the world tilted, the air knocked from my lungs. But then, something shifted. Instead of the crushing pain I expected, a wave of absolute, chilling clarity washed over me. Her words weren't a revelation, they were a confirmation, a release. There was nothing left to salvage here. There was nothing left to hope for. They had, with their own hands, severed the final frayed thread that connected us. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I looked down at her, at my cousin, a woman who shared my blood but not an ounce of my heart, and I felt nothing, just a vast empty distance. Thank you for clarifying, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. And then I turned and walked away, and I did not look back. I returned to the sterile silence of my motel room, the echo of Serafina's final word, burden, reverberating in the empty space around me. It was a wound, deep and festering, a confirmation of the darkest insecurities I had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. For a few hours, I let the pain wash over me, a cold, familiar tide. I thought I had reached the absolute limit of their cruelty, the bedrock of their contempt. I was wrong. The real gut punch, the one designed to be a knockout blow, was yet to come. An email from Lyra popped up on my laptop screen. The subject line was stark, written in all caps, urgent from Caspian's lawyers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. With a deep, steadying breath, I clicked it open. Attached was a PDF, an official legal document stamped with the intimidating letterhead of a high-powered DC law firm. It was a cease and desist letter. My eyes scanned the dense, aggressive paragraphs of legalese. It was standard, ugly stuff at first, the kind of corporate saber-rattling designed to scare a person into submission. It formally forbade me from presenting myself as the heir to the Carena estate. It prohibited me from contacting any member of the board of Ethelgard Industries. It warned me against setting foot on the mansion's property, threatening restraining orders and further legal action. It was a legal warning shot, a declaration that their wealth and influence would crush me. I expected it. I was prepared for it. But then my eyes fell upon the third paragraph, and the world went quiet. This section wasn't about me. It was about my father. The cold, detached legal language, crafted for maximum damage, called Major Jackson Creed a fabricated personage, an alleged deserter, a fiction, they claimed, invented by my grandfather in his late-stage dementia, for the sole purpose of defrauding the rightful Crow family heirs of their inheritance. The words blurred. I read them again and again. They weren't just trying to erase me from the future. They were trying to methodically, legally, and publicly obliterate my father from the past. They were spitting on the grave of a soldier I had never even had the chance to properly mourn. They were calling a hero a coward, a man of honor a fraud. They were taking the single precious image of him, the one piece of truth I had, and attempting to burn it to ash in the fire of their greed. They wanted to desecrate a memory that was all I had left of him. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid, then instantly flash to a boil. This was no longer about money. It was no longer about a house or a corporation or stocks in a portfolio. This was about honor. The honor of my grandfather, the general who had served his country with distinction for 40 years. The honor of my father, the paratrooper who had earned his place in the 82nd Airborne, a brotherhood I now belonged to, and the honor of a daughter who would not, could not, stand by and let them be defiled. They had crossed every conceivable line of human decency. They had poured gasoline on the most sacred ground and lit a match without a second thought. I stared at the screen, the poisonous words dancing before my eyes. The silence in the small room grew heavy, suffocating. The hum of the cheap air conditioner faded into nothing. The lingering pain from Seraphina's words, the loneliness, the grief, it all burned away in the furnace of a new, pure rage. And then a strange and terrifying calm descended upon me. The storm inside me went still. The tears I thought might come never did. The impulse to scream into a pillow vanished. The gnawing self-doubt was incinerated. All that remained was a single, laser-focused objective, a mission. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping harshly in the quiet room. I stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the indifferent, glittering lights of Alexandria. A vow I had taken years ago, with my right hand raised and my heart, full of purpose, echoed in my mind. The oath of office for every commissioned officer in the United States Armed Forces. I, Praise Carena, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestic. Silvana and Caspian were not a foreign power. They were an enemy from within. a domestic threat that had rotted the foundation of my family from the inside out with their lies and their greed. They had betrayed trust, betrayed family, and now they had betrayed the honor of a fallen soldier. My duty was no longer a matter of choice. It was an obligation. Silence was no longer a strategy. It was complicity. I pulled out my phone. My thumb was perfectly steady as I found Lyra's number in my recent calls. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert. "Lyra," I said. My voice was flat, calm, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice I used to give orders in the field, when the stakes were life and death and there was no room for error. "We're no longer on the defensive." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air, a declaration of war. "We're going on the offensive." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her sharp, legal mind. Then her reply came back, crisp and resolute. "Roger that, Major." There was no hesitation, no doubt in her voice, just pure, unshakable loyalty. "What are your orders?" The fight had officially begun. Have you ever been pushed so far that the only thing left to do is fight back with everything you have? That's where I was. There was no turning back. My motel room transformed. The spare bed became a holding area for documents. The small desk was command central, my laptop glowing day and night. The flimsy wall above it became our mission board, covered in a spiderweb of sticky notes and printouts connected by lines of red marker. It was no longer a place of hiding. It was a tactical operations center, a war room. Lyra, with her insider's knowledge of Ethelgard's labyrinthine finances, was my lead analyst. I, with a strategist's mind, was the mission commander. Together, we were a two-woman army launching a full-scale offensive. I found myself instinctively applying the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, a decision-making cycle drilled into me since my early days of training. We had observed the enemy's actions. Now it was time to orient ourselves to the new battlefield and prepare to act. Our first operation was a campaign of financial reconnaissance. "Follow the money," Lyra said, her eyes alight with a fierce intelligence. "It always tells the truth." She guided me through the digital maze of Caspian's dealings, her fingers flying across her own keyboard. She quickly pointed to a single recurring name that appeared in dozens of transactions: the Meridian Trust. On the surface, it was a pristine organization, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting military veterans and their families. Its website was filled with noble rhetoric and smiling photos of soldiers. Its honorary advisory board was a who's who of Washington's elite: senators, lobbyists, and society doyens, all powerful friends of Silvana. It was the perfect cover, a shield of patriotism and goodwill. "They're using veterans to launder money," Lyra said, her voice tight with disgust. "It's more than just fraud. It's a desecration." "Then we're not just exposing them," I said, my own anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. "We're taking it down." We worked around the clock, fueled by lukewarm coffee and take-out containers of Chinese food and pizza that littered the room. The days and nights blurred into a single, sustained effort. Lyra, using her old access codes, dove deep into Ethelgard's backup servers, pulling files Caspian thought were long deleted. I became the liaison to my new network of allies. I contacted Sergeant Kowalski, and my request was simple. I needed the official military records for Major Jackson Creed, and I needed them yesterday. The information began to flow in, a steady stream of digital ammunition. Lyra, with a triumphant cry, recovered a batch of deleted emails. They were the key. They showed a series of wire transfers authorized by Caspian, moving exactly $11 million, the precise amount of my inheritance, from an Ethelgard account directly into the Meridian Trust. From there, the money trail became a complex web of shell corporations registered in Delaware, all leading back to a single beneficiary, Caspian Thorne himself. He hadn't just planned to contest the will, he had already stolen the money. Simultaneously, an email arrived from Sergeant Kowalski. Attached was a scanned PDF of a government document. It was the official DD Form 1300, the report of casualty for Major Jackson Jax Creed. My eyes scanned the boxes: name, rank, service number, and then Box 10, cause of death. The words were stark, official, undeniable: killed in action. It came with a heavily redacted after-action report, but the summary was clear. He had died performing an act of valor that had saved the lives of his fellow soldiers, including a young general named Theron Karina. I printed the documents, the paper warm from the machine. This was my proof. This was his honor, reclaimed. This was the truth they had tried to bury. But the final, definitive piece of evidence, the smoking gun, came not from Caspian's careful plotting, but from Seraphina's careless vanity. Lyra let out a low whistle as she stared at her screen. Praise, you need to see this. She had been cross-referencing the Shell Corporation's bank statements with social media. And there it was. In a moment of supreme arrogance, Seraphina had used a corporate American Express card to purchase a $50,000 Cartier necklace from a boutique on Rodeo Drive. The problem for her was that the corporate card wasn't from Ethelgard. It was registered to Delaware Acquisitions LLC, one of Caspian's primary money laundering shell companies, funded directly by the Meridian Trust. Her own signature was on the digital receipt. "We've got him," Lyra whispered, her eyes shining. "This connects all of them. It's not just fraud now, it's conspiracy. It's money laundering, it's wire fraud. Praise. This is a RICO case. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb, designed to take down entire criminal enterprises. They hadn't just made a mistake, they had handed us the weapon to destroy them. Perhaps they sensed the net closing in, because it was then that Silvana made her final, fatal move. She officially filed a lawsuit against me. The charge was defamation of character. I looked at the legal notice Lyra forwarded to me, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Fine. She had chosen the battlefield, and I was more than ready for the fight. The federal courtroom in Alexandria was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, a suffocating blend of expensive perfume and nervous energy. The pews were filled with the vultures of Washington, D.C. media, members of the Ethelgard board looking pale and anxious, and in the back, a silent, formidable presence. An entire row was occupied by Sergeant Kowalski and my grandfather's paratrooper brothers. They wore their unit's windbreakers, sitting straight-backed and solemn, a quiet honor guard in a den of thieves. They weren't there to intimidate, they were there to bear witness. At the defendant's table, Silvana and Caspian sat with an air of untouchable arrogance. They whispered to their slick, high-priced lawyer, their expressions confident. They believed this was their arena, their rules. They believed they were about to crush me. Their lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, no relation, a cruel irony, began his opening statement by launching a direct assault on my character. He painted me as a disgruntled, unstable soldier, a woman irreparably damaged by combat trauma. He used my service record not as a testament to my honor, but as a weapon against me, suggesting I was prone to delusions, fabricating stories for financial gain. He was trying to frame me as a classic case of a veteran suffering from PTSD, attempting to extort her own grieving family. It was a vile, despicable tactic, and I saw the old soldiers in the back stiffen with a collective, silent rage. I sat beside Lyra at our table, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I listened to every poisonous word, every calculated lie. I let him build his narrative. I let him dig their grave a little deeper. When he finally finished, the judge turned to me. "Major Karina, you may take the witness stand." I stood, but I did not walk to the stand. Instead, I walked to the center of the courtroom, standing before the judge's bench. I was in my full Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket immaculate, the medals polished to a high shine. I was not a witness, I was not a victim, I was an officer here to deliver a report. Before I began, my eyes found the American flag standing beside the judge. For truth, for honor, for country, I thought. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and carrying, resonating with the authority of command. "This is not a defamation case. This is a criminal investigation." That was Lyra's cue. On the large screen behind me, a slide appeared, then another, and another. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft rhythmic click of Lyra's mouse. First, the fraudulent emails between Silvana and Caspian, their contempt for the little soldier girl, laid bare for the world to see. I heard a gasp from the gallery. Next, a detailed flowchart, a spiderweb of deceit, mapping the illegal transfer of $11 million from Ethelgard Industries through the sham veterans charity, the Meridian Trust, and into the Delaware shell corporations controlled by Caspian Thorne. The members of the Ethelgard board began furiously whispering amongst themselves. Then, the final nail in the financial coffin, the high-resolution image of the $50,000 Cartier receipt from Rodeo Drive, bearing Serafina's elegant, damning signature, paid for by a corporate card linked directly to one of the shell companies. I watched as Caspian's face went from smug to ashen. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Silvana sat frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table, her face a mask of disbelief. They had believed they were untouchable. Now their criminal conspiracy was being projected 10 feet high in a federal courtroom. I let the image of the receipt hang on the screen for a long, painful moment. These financial crimes, as extensive as they are merely a symptom, Your Honor, I continued, my voice low and steady. A symptom of a much deeper disease, a moral rot that has festered at the heart of this family for decades. I walked back to my table and picked up a single file. I held it up. "This," I said, "is the official military casualty report for Major Jackson Creed, United States Army." I read his commendations aloud. I read the summary of the after-action report, detailing how he had exposed himself to enemy fire to drag a wounded officer to safety, an officer named General Theron Karina. Then, I opened my grandfather's personal journal, the one from the sealed envelope. My voice trembled slightly for the first time as I read his words, his private agony, written a year after my father's death. "Silvana insists we must maintain this story. She says his name is a complication, that his memory is a threat to our family's standing. She has made me bury my friend, my hero, for a second time. May God forgive me for this lie I am forced to tell my granddaughter." I closed the journal and turned my gaze directly on Silvana. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. "She didn't just steal money, Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing with a fury I no longer tried to contain. She stole a hero's legacy. She tried to erase the memory of a soldier who gave his life for this country and for my grandfather. It was too much. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful matriarch, pushed past its breaking point, finally shattered. Drained of all reason, cornered like a rat, Silvana shot to her feet. Her face was a grotesque mask of hatred, her eyes wild and bloodshot. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, animalistic sound that clawed at the air. "You and your pathetic father should never have existed. I did everything to make sure he never came back. He deserved to die." The confession, raw and undeniable, hung in the electrified air. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The media erupted, cameras flashed, Caspian looked like he had been turned to stone. The judge's gavel came down, a sharp cracking sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. Once, twice, 3 times. Order, order in the court. But there was no more order. Everything was over. The days that followed the courtroom explosion felt like living through the aftershock of an earthquake. The world I had known, with its toxic fault lines, had been irrevocably fractured. Silvana was taken into custody directly from the courtroom, her crazed confession replayed endlessly on cable news. Federal agents arrested Caspian at his gleaming office tower in Tyson's a few days later, a quiet, humiliating end to his reign of greed. The headlines were relentless, splashed across everything from the Washington Post to Fox News. The Crow-Carina dynasty collapses. DC socialite implicated in fraud, possible murder conspiracy. Ethelgard Industries, to prevent a total collapse, was placed under the temporary stewardship of a court-appointed receiver, with Lyra Vance acting as the operational lead to steady the ship. I watched it all unfold from the detached safety of my motel room. The television screen a portal to a world I no longer felt a part of. There was no elation, no triumphant fist pump, just a quiet, hollow emptiness. In survival training, they teach you that after you escape immediate danger, the first priority is to find shelter and assess the damage. That's where I was now. The battle was over. The enemy was defeated. But the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of what was once, by definition, my family. And I was standing alone in the ruins. A week later, Serafina chose her final battlefield, the court of public opinion. She staged a press conference on the manicured front lawn of the Carina mansion, a place I now had the keys to but no desire to enter. She stood before a sea of microphones, dressed in a somber gray dress, her hair artfully disheveled, her eyes puffy and red. It was the performance of her life. She wept. She spoke of being a sheltered, loving wife and daughter, completely blinded by the insatiable greed of her husband and the domineering manipulation of her mother. She claimed to have known nothing of the illegal activities, painting herself as the ultimate victim, a pawn in their wicked games. She begged the public for forgiveness and privacy in her time of unimaginable grief. I watched her on the screen, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel disgust. I just felt a profound, weary pity. Even now, with the entire charade exposed, her only instinct was to find a new mask to hide behind. She would never face the truth because she had no truth to face. She was a hollow person, a collection of reflections of what she thought others wanted to see. In that moment, she ceased to be my cousin. She was a stranger on television, a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. I changed the channel. It was 2 days later that the letter arrived. It was delivered by a courier from Mr. Finch's law office, a single plain manila envelope, There was no return address, just my name, Major Praise Karena, written on the front in a strong, steady, masculine hand. A soldier's handwriting. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, my fingers trembling slightly as I carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. The letter was short. Praise, they told me you would be safer without me. They told me my existence was a danger to you, a ghost that would only bring you harm. For a long time, I believed them. It was a mistake I have regretted every single day of my life. But I never stopped watching over you, from a distance. It's time to stop being a ghost. It's time for us to meet. Your father, J.C. Jackson Creed. J.C. my father was alive. The words swam before my eyes. The stoic discipline that had been my shield, my armor, my entire identity, finally shattered. The grief I'd never allowed myself to feel. The tears I'd refused to shed for a lifetime of hurts. The crushing weight I had carried for so long. It all broke free. I dropped the letter, covered my face with my hands, and for the first time since I was a small child, I wept. He asked to meet me at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. There was no more fitting place on earth. It was a crisp, clear morning on the National Mall, the kind of day where the sky is a painfully bright blue. When I arrived, I saw him standing before the black granite wall, his back to me. His hand was resting gently on the polished surface, tracing over the endless river of names, a silent communion with ghosts I could only imagine. He was older than the man in the photograph, of course. His hair, once dark, was now more silver than not. But his posture was unmistakable, the ramrod straight back of a soldier. He turned as if sensing my presence, and I finally saw his face. I saw the warm, crinkling eyes from the photo, eyes that held the weight of 3 decades of secrets and regrets. Praise, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that spanned a lifetime. I had rehearsed 100 different things to say in my head. 100 questions, 100 accusations, 100 expressions of pain. But in that moment, standing before him, they all dissolved. Words were inadequate. There was only a chasm of 29 years that needed to be closed. I walked forward, my steps unsteady, and wrapped my arms around him. He held me tightly, his hand coming up to cradle the back of my head. And in that embrace, the lies, the loneliness, and the long, aching years of feeling like a burden finally, mercifully, melted away. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't a mistake. I was home. I had found my family. A few months later, I stood on a podium at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with journalists, lawmakers, and in the front row, my new reality. My father sat beside Lyra, and next to them, the entire row was filled with the proud, weathered faces of Sergeant Kowalski and my grandfather's paratrooper brothers. I cleared my throat, looking out at the crowd, and began. My grandfather, General Theron Karena, left me a great inheritance, I said. But I've come to realize that his true legacy, and the legacy of the father I never knew, Major Jackson Creed, is not something that can be found on a balance sheet. Therefore, Ethelgard Industries and all its assets will be liquidated. In its place, we are establishing a new entity. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. Today, I am proud to announce the formation of the Creed Karena Foundation for Truth and Transition. A murmur went through the room. My family's legacy will no longer be in building a corporation. It will be in honoring the legacy of 2 soldiers. This foundation will provide pro bono legal services and support for veterans and their families. Families whose stories have been buried, whose voices have been silenced, whose honor has been challenged. We will ensure that no truth is ever forgotten again. I looked at my father. His eyes were shining with pride. I thought of the final line in my grandfather's will, a line I now understood completely. Your courage has never disappointed me. I hoped, wherever he was, that he was not disappointed now. Later that evening, after the press had dispersed, my father and I stood by a large window, looking out over the lights of the Capitol. The general would be so proud of you, Praise, he said quietly. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I think he'd be proud of both of us. Across the room, Sergeant Kowalski and the other paratroopers were waiting for us, their mission of support complete for the day. As my father and I walked toward them, they simultaneously came to attention, their movements sharp and synchronized despite their age. Each of them raised a hand in a crisp, formal salute. I stopped, stood tall, and returned the salute, my own movements sharp and precise. But this time, I wasn't saluting as a solitary officer fighting a lonely war. I was saluting as a daughter who had found her father, as a soldier who had completed her most sacred duty, to protect the truth and to bring the legacy of heroes into the light. My dawn, at long last, had finally come. My dawn had finally come, but I know my story is just one of many. I fought to reclaim my family's honor and to find my own truth. I know that so many of you listening have fought your own quiet battles against being unseen or unheard by those who should have cherished you most. If you feel comfortable, I would be honored if you shared a piece of your own story in the comments. Your voice has power, and you are not alone. For more stories that understand this journey, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening.